All right, we're here in Matthew chapter 2, and the name of the sermon is Why Christians Should Not Support Palestine. Why Christians Should Not Support Palestine. And so, obviously the first sermon I preached, Why Christians Should Not Support Israel, because there's no biblical reason that we should support Israel. And when Israel and Palestine officially went to war again, maybe 2 years ago or whatever, I decided I was going to study out the history of the conflict and the history of the struggle, because I never really personally studied it out myself. I had just kind of gone off what I had heard from various people, and I said, well, I just want to have a fresh mind, because on any topic, I don't want to just come with an assumption. And I went into the study basically expecting that Palestine are pretty much complete victims, and when I studied it out, that is not the conclusion that I actually came to. Now, this doesn't make Israel good, because both sides, when you look at the history, in my opinion, are very guilty. But it made me walk away saying, hey, I don't support Israel, obviously, biblically, but as a Christian, I don't support Palestine either, because in my opinion, they're not innocent victims at all when you actually look at the history. So we are going to look at some Bible, but I'm not really going to go into the history of Zionism and the struggle over here and where they started and everything. And I'll say this, that when we look at events that are occurring today, that are in the news now, it's hard to fully know what's true, what's not, how much of the news do I believe? Am I getting a slanted perspective? And it's hard enough with issues that are originating now, much less events that started over 100 years ago. And so, hey, I encourage everybody to study out the history for yourself and come to your own conclusion, and you can kind of figure out how much blame you throw around each side or whatever. But I'll just kind of show you the history, and we're going to see a lot of Bible as well. But the first thing I want to show you and talk about is a man by the name of Theodore Herzl. And Theodore Herzl is given the nickname the spiritual father of the Jewish state. And so Theodore Herzl was a Jew by ethnicity, and he wrote a pamphlet called Der Judenstaat, and he elaborated his visions of a Jewish homeland. And so he talked about these things. He was a journalist, so by him writing, it kind of just put the news out there. And there was a lot of rich Jews that kind of helped spread the message as they kind of got on board, saying, hey, we should have our own homeland. And so this started to kind of catch on. What's interesting about him being known as the spiritual father of the Jewish state, I said he was a Jew by ethnicity. The guy was an atheist. He did not believe in God. So the person who was really the ground floor of leading this movement of Zionism didn't even believe in God. And so I think the nickname, the spiritual father of the Jewish state, is apropos, because they are a godless and a wicked nation that doesn't really believe the Bible. And the person who really led Zionism to becoming prominent didn't even believe in God himself. Okay? So that kind of shows you what to think of the nation of Israel. So as I'm preaching why we should not support Palestine, this is not a pro-Israeli sermon either, okay? Because they're very guilty in this history also. At the time of these events, in 1900, there were approximately 400,000 Muslims in that part of the world and 85,000 Jews. So basically 5-to-1 ratio almost of Muslims to Jews living in that part of the world. Palestine, Israel, what we have today. Now, it's important for us to understand about Judaism. The reason why this guy is the spiritual father of the Jewish state is because what he was teaching was actually against Judaism. After 70 AD, when the Jews got removed, they had to tell their people something to motivate them. And what they told their people is, because they're asking, well, why aren't we going to return to power? And what the Jewish leaders said, the spiritual leaders, for over 1,500 years, is that there are two Messiahs that are coming. Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David. Messiah ben Joseph, named after the Joseph of the book of Genesis, because he is a picture of the actual Messiah. And what they're saying is that the Messiah is going to come and suffer first, and after the suffering Messiah comes, it will usher in the Messiah that's going to reign, Messiah ben David. Okay? Now, of course, we understand that Jesus was both of those. There's not two Messiahs. There's one Messiah. And Jesus came in his first time and he suffered. And he comes the second time to reign. Now I mention this because Judaism was against Zionism over 100 years ago. And so most Jews were against the idea of going to the promised land, going to Israel, because they thought if we try to go to the promised land before Messiah ben Joseph comes, it's going to make God angry by preemptively going back to the promised land when we did not wait on him. So what's going to take place is God's going to be angry and we're going to have to wait even longer. So most Jews in the 1800s were against Zionism because they said that goes against our religion. But as there was a lot of money and a lot of things written, you start believing what you hear, and all of a sudden it starts to shift more and more. More are supporting Zionism. Even at 1900, I would say if you took a poll of Jews, most would be against Zionism. But the wheels are starting to turn, and there's a lot of rich Zionists that use their money to lobby governments. Okay, now Matthew chapter 2. I want to make sure I show you a lot of Bible as well. Matthew 2. And it says in Matthew 2, verse 1, Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And Herod is troubled because he's thinking, wait a minute, born King of the Jews? I'm the King of the Jews. And so he's worried that as Jesus was born, he's going to lose his power. So really, Herod gets so mad and kills all these babies, and he didn't even have to worry because Jesus was coming to suffer the first time. But he's so mad, he's afraid that, wait a minute, he's born King of the Jews. I'm the king. I want to keep my power. Because he did not understand these things. Okay? And it says in verse 4, And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born, Christ being Messiah, and they should said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. So what you see is, even during that day, there's a lot of confusion because Herod hears this. He's like, well, wait a minute, where did it say he was going to be born? It's like, if you're the king of Jerusalem, you ought to know the scripture of, the people that are over there, right? But he was not aware. He did not know what his scriptures taught. And there was a lot of confusion. But what I'm saying is, after they were removed during the 1st century AD, after that, the big doctrine they were teaching is, hey, there's two Messiahs, and he's going to suffer first. But of course, they did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And so their, opinion was that Jesus was a false prophet. He was a sorcerer. He's a bad guy. And so they did not believe he was the Messiah. But what they were teaching is, hey, a suffering Messiah is going to come first. And until that point, we will not enter into the promised land. Okay? Turn your Bible to Matthew 20. Matthew chapter 20. So what you need to realize is that at this time, most Jews were against Zionism. But here's the thing, there are still Jews that live today that are against Zionism. And there are, at these pro-Palestinian rallies, there will be Jews that are in the crowd being like, free Palestine, and then be like anti-Israel, and then they think those Jews are bad, the Zionist Jews. And they're preaching against that. So there are even Jews today. It's very interesting. I've watched a documentary. I've listened to them interview. And they'll say no, we are not supposed to go back to the promised land. The Messiah must come first. And he has not come. Now, of course, these people are false believers as well. Because they reject the true Messiah. But they say, no, wait a minute. This is not. And I would imagine most of the Jews that believe this are ones that probably understand and know their history. That have read a lot of stuff. And said, well, wait a minute. This is not what we taught for 1,500 years. So why are we going back to Israel? And they believe that those Jews are actually under a curse, and then they are waiting so they can one day return once the suffering Messiah comes. Now, they're obviously confused in the gospel as well, but they understand a little bit of the history of Judaism and what they taught over the last 2,000 years. So around this time, most Jews are against Zionism, but there's also a lot of money with the Zionist Jews. So that's 1900, 400,000 Muslims, 85,000 Jews. Then there's a big event known as World War I that took place from 1914 to 1918. Okay? At this time, that area of the world was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. And if you look at the world in 1900, what you're going to find is that there's about a third of the amount of countries in 1900 as there are today. Back then, there were not all of these countries that exist today. Most of these countries were under these more giant empires. There was less than 100 countries in 1900. And so the Ottoman Empire, which was a huge part of World War I, there's more than 30 modern-day countries that are under that one empire. Now, some of those countries were able to rule autonomously, where they're under the Ottoman Empire, but they basically have their own leadership there. But most of them are just completely under the Ottoman Empire. And so after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire fell apart, all these areas are like kind of uninhabited, and they come under the control of various European countries. Okay? During this time from 1914 to 1918, there were a couple big declarations or things involving Great Britain that are very important to understand what's going on. In 1915 to 1916, there was what's known as the McMahon-Hussein Correspondence. And basically what Great Britain said, because during this time, as the world is at war with one another, there's a lot of countries that are sort of in between, or they might be on one side, but they're trying to persuade them. And, Great Britain was trying to get that part of the world on their side. So basically this correspondence is Great Britain telling Palestine, oh yeah, we're going to give you your own land. We're going to officially declare you as a country. You are going to be your own people. And they're basically trying to get Palestine on their side. But then in 1917, Great Britain went to the Jews and they said, oh yeah, we understand your plight. We want to give you your own land. We're going to put you back over there to Israel. And they made dual promises to Palestine and Israel, two different religions, dual promises, promising both of them that area of land. That is why what in my opinion, the majority of blame is actually Great Britain. Okay? Because what do you expect to happen when you make promises to two groups of people of a different religion? And then, of course, they reneged on their promise to the Palestinians, which made the Palestinians angry. Of course the area is going to be at war with one another. I mean, it's just common sense. And this is why when war takes place, nobody wins. It ends up being a disaster. There is dishonesty. I mean, the Bible speaks about in Daniel of people, two rulers telling lies at a table with one another. That's what they do in order to win wars and get support on their side. So Great Britain made competing promises to two different groups of people for that part of the world. And so eventually, and the promise to the Jews was known as the Balfour Declaration in 1917. And so I'll just read you from this article on it. It says, the Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, then an Ottoman region with a small minority Jewish population. And at the time of this declaration, the population was 442,000 Muslims, 90,000 Jews. So still a 5-to-1 ratio at this time. Okay? So at the end of World War I, you've got this massive empire that has fallen apart. And basically these different areas end up getting ruled by different European countries. And so some of these countries that are underneath European rule, whether it be France or Great Britain, some of them were just kind of more of a headache. They didn't really want them. And quite honestly, Great Britain didn't want the land of Palestine. They didn't want that area. It was a headache. They wanted to get rid of it. They're kind of stuck in this situation that they made these promises. It makes them look bad. And so a lot of these countries that now exist, they were underneath these countries and they talked to the governments. And the governments, like Great Britain and France, they basically granted them their own independence and gave them their own country. Palestine tried to do that with Great Britain, and Great Britain didn't allow it. Okay, so that was the choice of Great Britain when they were underneath Great Britain. A lot of these other countries, they fought for and won their independence in the last 100 years. And it really shouldn't be all that shocking to us, because we live in a world today where there's so many countries, and it's hard for us to think of so many less. But, it's only 125 years ago where the Philippines was just like completely under Spanish rule, and things have changed a lot in that amount of time. The world changes, and the world we live in today has more than 200 countries, but it did not have that at the time of World War I. It was a very different world, okay? So, in 1933, there was something known as the Havara Agreement, and it was an agreement between Nazi Germany and the Zionist organization signed on August 25th, 1933. Okay? And so basically right after World War I, we prepare for World War II. It's not really that much later. It's like 2 decades later. Okay? And so under Nazi Germany, of course, you think of Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler and the Zionists had a common goal. They wanted the Jews to leave. And so the Nazis signed the agreement. It's like, we're going to help you transport your stuff. We're going to help you get over there. And here's the thing about this. The Jews that did not get on board with the Zionist program, all of a sudden they're the enemies of the Zionist Jews. And so the Zionist Jews are kind of like, well, hey, you come with us or whatever. And what ends up taking place? Well, most of the Jews that died during World War II were the non-Zionist Jews, because they didn't go along with the program. They thought it was wrong to go to Israel. And then, during war, a lot of people died. Okay? Now, look, I don't side with anyone during World War II. I don't know enough about it, number one, to begin with. And I'm not saying anybody's innocent. I'm just saying the Zionist Jews kind of left their own ethnicity to just be killed because of the fact they're like, you do what we say, or we don't want to have anything to do with you. And that's not a conspiracy. You can look up the Havar Agreement, signed on August 25th, 1933. There'll be a long article on Wikipedia talking about this. This is just known as a fact, where basically what Adolf Hitler wanted was just his people of white ethnicity that basically looked like me, and basically everybody else who wants you out of the country, because he was a nationalist. Okay? And the Zionist Jews, they wanted all the Jews to go home to the Promised Land. And if they didn't during that part of the world, during World War, then a lot of people ended up dying. Okay? It says the agreement enabled Jews fleeing persecution under the new Nazi regime to transfer some portion of their assets to British Mandatory Palestine. So that's what that part of the world was called under Great Britain. British Mandatory Palestine, the area of the Gaza Strip and Palestine and Israel. That's what it was known as at that time in 1933. And immigrants sold their assets in Germany to pay for essential goods manufactured in Germany to be shipped to Mandatory Palestine. Okay. Now, here's the thing about this. In my opinion, it's very complicated to really know who owns or controls a land, or who has the right to it. For example, if you go to the United States of America, a lot of Native Americans were pushed off their land, and what was done to a lot of them wasn't right, but a couple hundred years later, what are you going to do? That's what happened. It is what it is. And so, you can complain about it forever, or you can just move on with your life. In my opinion, Palestine should have just moved on with their life, because we're going to see actually their major sins that they did coming up, because they were very bitter and very angry about what happened. But here's what I want us to understand. That a lot of countries that were part of the Ottoman Empire, they fought for and they won their independence. Palestine declared war on Great Britain, and they lost that war. All these other nations won their wars. You lost. I don't know what to tell you. It's nobody's fault that you lost. All these other nations, they won in their wars, and Palestine, they lost in theirs. It is what it is. And so, whether or not it's right or not, well, at this point, it's like 80 years later, it's like eventually you get to the phrase, don't cry over spilled milk. You got to just move on with your life. Okay? And so Palestine fought for and they lost in those wars, whereas other countries fought and won their independence. So Palestine didn't have independence. They are still under the rule of Great Britain. Now, should Great Britain have controlled that land after World War I? I don't know. The land was given to them. They controlled it. You can look back to the Philippines when Ferdinand Magellan came in here, and Spain just took control of the country. What are you going to do about it, though? That's just what happened, and you're just underneath Spanish rule. And at some point, you got to kind of just forget about it and just kind of move on, because this is my life. It is what it is. And, it's not like anyone necessarily has a stake, like we own this land and nobody can dispute it. It's not like God says this land belongs to this group of people no matter what. It's kind of like people have fought for and taken over lands throughout history. It's just what is done, okay? But here's what I want you to understand. Great Britain chose to give land to Israel. That was Great Britain's choice. Should they have had the right to the land and owned it? That can be disputed. But they were given the rule by the majority of the world, and they chose to give some of that land to Israel. Well, here's what it says in Matthew 20, verse 9. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. When the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. When they received it, they murmured against the good man of the house, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? And so the Bible gives this example. And imagine that you have a company, and you hire somebody, and you're going to pay him a certain amount of money for working 12 hours. And then you hire somebody for just an hour, and you pay him the exact same amount as the person who worked all day. Now, if you worked all day, it doesn't seem fair, does it? But the thing is, the boss can choose to give however much money he wants because it belongs to him. Absolutely, if I was Palestinian during that time, it wouldn't seem fair. But the thing is, they never controlled that land. They were under the Ottoman Empire, and after that, they weren't an independent nation. So the thing is, Great Britain was given control by a majority of the powers of the world, and they chose to give a lot of that land to Israel. Now, is that the right thing? I don't think it is the right thing. But once again, this is Great Britain. That's what they chose to do, and quite honestly, they have a right to do what they want with the land that they own. Now, would I have agreed with that? No. And is it going to lead to war? Absolutely. But it just is what it is. This is what takes place when you have wars and you have fighting, where all of a sudden you've got land and people will just do whatever. I mean, this happens all the time in today's world, where governments might just take over land and say, hey, you're no longer allowed to live here. We're taking it. You got to leave. I don't think it's the right thing, but the thing is, what can you do to fight against it? It is what it is. Now go to Acts 17. Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. Look, I do believe that originally the Palestinians were victims in what took place. But the thing is, you can't just take that victim mentality with you your entire life. It'd be like somebody who's a grown adult that is still complaining about how they were raised as a kid. It's like, you got to just get over it at some point. Whatever happened, happened. And it's going to destroy your life if you just dwell on something from 10 years ago, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. At some point, you got to just move on. It just is what it is. Things happen, sin takes place, and it ends up being a disaster on all sides. That's just the way that it works. Okay? Now, Adolf Hitler's idea was to have basically a nation that was purely Aryan race. Okay? Now, this is not a biblical concept. I stand before you today of a different race than you. When in reality, there's only one race, and it's called the human race. And we all descend back from Noah and his sons. And so, yeah, obviously people went to different areas and they developed different characteristics, but we're all part of the same human race. And in church, it doesn't matter red or yellow, black or white, they are all precious in the sight of God. But here's what it says in Acts 17, verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things ye are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worship with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. See, the Bible says God has made us of one blood, all nations of the earth. And look, over time, nations change. They change their boundaries, they combine together, but it doesn't change the fact that we're all of one blood. So, do I agree with the side of Adolf Hitler? Absolutely not, because of the fact that it shouldn't matter what your ethnicity is, where you live. Now, turn in your Bible to Judges 15. Judges 15. And let me just start going into some more of this history a little bit. Yes, a lot of Jews were helped to move to Palestine at that time, or British Mandatory Palestine. They made it a lot easier for them to move. But one thing a lot of people don't realize is that a large percentage of the Jews moved to that part of the world by buying land from rich Muslim owners that did not live there. There were a lot of rich Muslims that lived in other countries but owned property in Palestine, and they sold it to the highest bidder, which was pretty much always Jews. And so a large percentage of the Jews that migrated did it by legally buying land from rich Muslims. And that's a fact. Now, I tried to figure out what the exact percentage or number is. And, according to all my research, even on ChatGPT, they said it's really hard to get accurate data to find out the percentage. But they said a large number of the Jews moved legally by buying land from rich Muslims. So it'd be like this. Imagine that, somebody lived over in the UAE, but they owned property here and they were a Filipino, and they decide, you know what, I'm going to move to the UAE. They might decide to sell their property here. And imagine if Filipino after Filipino sells their property to someone from China. And eventually, all of a sudden, you've got more and more Chinese people. And that would bother a lot of people. Right? That's what took place. But here's what I want you to understand. They bought the land from Muslims that didn't live there in Palestine. So Palestine, why don't you get mad at some of the other Muslims that sold their land to Jews? The thing is, you can't just always blame Israel for everything. And I'm not pro-Israel. I just preached a whole sermon on that. I'm just saying, a lot of the blame they're putting is not on the fault of Israel. It's on Great Britain. It's on rich Muslims. They bought land legally. They had every right to do that from rich Muslims. And yeah, they had more money so they could do what they wanted. And a lot of the land they were buying wasn't even good land, but they used their money to actually turn it into a better place. It is what it is. Now, obviously, if I was a Muslim living over there, and you're going to see that in a second, the skyrocketing of the Jewish population, it would bother me, right? You live here and you're the Muslim majority, and all of a sudden the Jews just end up outnumbering you. Yeah, it's kind of like, Exodus, when it's like, man, the Hebrews are more and mightier than us. And it leads to the Egyptians wanting to go to war and oppress them. And actually, that's what Palestine tried to do to the Jews, but they lost. And we'll talk about that here in a second. And then eventually that got turned on its head, and now they're the ones that are oppressed. So a lot of Jews moved over there legally by buying land from rich Muslims. And look, of course today, the Jews mistreat the Palestinians over there. That's a fact. I'm not disputing that. But what about the history that led to that point? A lot of them moved legally, okay? There was something known as the Great Palestinian Revolt. As there was the increase in the Jewish population for various reasons, all of a sudden the Palestinians got very mad and they declared war and tried to win their independence from Great Britain. And it was a 3-year war from 1936 to 1939. The movement sought independence from British colonial rule and the end of British support for Zionism, including Jewish immigration and land sales to Jews. And what happened is the government of Great Britain sold land to Jews, and Muslims sold land to Jews. They bought the land. They end up living there. Palestine gets mad. And so they decided to go to war with Great Britain and to win their independence, and they lost. A lot of countries won their independence. It's nobody's fault that you lost when you were trying to fight for your independence. They lost, so they didn't have their independence. Okay? By the time, and here's the thing. If you look at this part of the world in Jerusalem, yeah, it's the number one holy place for Jews. I guess they're happy because this is where we killed the Lord Jesus Christ, right? It's considered the number 3 holy place for Muslims, behind Mecca and Medina. Number 3 is Jerusalem. So what takes place is a lot of Muslim countries refuse to take in Palestinian refugees because they don't want them to leave. They want them to stay there and fight for it because Muslims want complete domination of Jerusalem. And there have been many quotes throughout the times, especially going back to this time, where they said they will exterminate and kill every last Jew and take control of the land. And they tried and they failed when they went to war with Israel. Okay? So, in 1941, after 8 years, when it was 5-1 Muslims to Jews, in 1941, it's 50-50. An equal amount of Muslims and Jews. 2 years later, in 1943, there are twice as many Jews as Muslims. And so it went from 5-1 to 2-1. So basically, times 10, switching in the other direction. And of course, there's a lot of fighting between these groups. Okay? So, a lot of Arab countries, a lot of Muslim countries, they got on board with the Palestinian movement, and so other Muslim countries decided to go to war with Israel and support Palestine in this struggle. Here's a quotation made by the Azim Pasha quotation made by Abdul Rahman Hassan Azam, and he was the Secretary General of the Arab League from 1945 to 1952. And so basically, the Ottoman Empire had all these Muslim countries together. Now you've got this Arab League that has come up, and it's basically sort of like the head Islamic organization politically in the world. And so these are the quotes coming directly from their head. And it says, if a war takes place with the Jewish state, he said, it would lead to a war of extermination and momentous massacre, which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacre and the Crusades. He's saying, we will exterminate and kill all the Jews. As we fought against the Crusaders, we will fight against you, and we will erase you from the earth. So basically, the head of the Muslims said, we're going to go to war, and we're going to erase you from the earth. We're going to kill every single last one of you. Yeah, it's a pretty believable quote from a Muslim. I mean, every country they go to, they end up having 100% control. Either you convert, or they kill you, you flee the country, and then you put, I'm a Muslim, because you're afraid of what's going to happen to you. And here's the thing. If Palestine had won this war, that part of the world would probably be 99% Muslim right now. They probably would have exterminated as many Jews as they could and kicked everybody else out of the land, kicked out the remaining Christians, and it would be just like countries like Turkey. Turkey, if you go back far enough, a lot of the Christianity was coming from the Bible in that part of the world, and now it's like 100% Muslim. Because they're violent, they take control, and that's why I don't like this, oh, we're innocent victims. It's like, no. It's like, Israel, yes, they're guilty in a lot of this. Even in the history I'm reading, a lot of this, Israel is guilty. This doesn't mean that Palestine is innocent. Palestine, essentially, from me studying, they were like the bully that thought they would win, and then they got beat when they went to war with Israel. It would be like this. If I went to the street and I walked up to someone and said, I'm going to kill you, and I knocked them on the ground and I was on top of them, and then a minute later they're on top of me, and it's like, no, look, I'm being attacked. I haven't done anything wrong. That's Palestine, in my personal opinion from studying. I don't see them as an innocent victim because, yeah, Israel was oppressing. And here's the thing about oppression. Every time war takes place, the winners oppress the losers. It's not right, but it happens all the time. What did Japan do to the Philippines after World War II? What did Russia do to Nazi Germany after World War II? They forced and attacked their women and tortured the people. This happens all the time when one side beats the other. And it's wrong, it's a sin, it's wicked. Yes, is Palestine being oppressed today? Yes, but you know what? They probably would have done far worse to the Jews if they had won, in my opinion. They probably would have killed them. So, as he says, we're going to kill every single last one of them. And he said, we're going to have volunteers from all over the world that support our cause and support Palestine. And he said, as far as India, Afghanistan, and China, to win the honor of martyrdom for the sake of Palestine. You might be surprised to learn that hundreds of Englishmen expressed their wish to volunteer in the Arab armies to fight the Jews. So he says this, it's like, we're going to fight, we're going to kill every single last one of them. We're going to get Chinese people to help, Indian people, people from Great Britain. Everyone around the world cares about the plight of the Palestinians. So the Arab-Israeli war starts in 1948. And it says, Zionist leaders announced the Israeli Declaration of Independence on May 14th, 1948. And the following morning, Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, and expeditionary forces from Iraq entered Palestine, taking control of the Arab areas and attacking Israeli forces and settlements. So basically, the Muslim countries, Palestine and the Arab countries, started the war with Israel. Now, in the most recent conflict, as far as I know, Israel started the war with Iran. But all these situations are so sticky because there's so much violence and hostility where it's just kind of like, you did this to me, so I'm going to do it to you, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. But they start the war over there, and it says the 10 months of fighting took place mostly on the territory of British Mandate in the Sinai Peninsula in southern Lebanon, interrupted by several truce periods. By the end of the war, the State of Israel controlled all the area that the UN had proposed for a Jewish state, as well as almost 60% of the area proposed for an Arab state. So basically, Muslim countries start a war with Israel. They say, we're going to wipe you off the face of the planet, and they lost. And then Israel took more of the land than they had before. I'm not surprised they did that when you said that you're going to kill every single last one of them. And here's what you got to understand. Throughout history, there have been several times where they tried to partition the land between Israel and Palestine. You say, why don't they just partition the land? Because every single time Palestine says no, and Israel's accepted many times. That's a fact. Now here's the thing. I'm not saying the partition was a fair partition. I can understand Palestine being mad. The original partition gave 55% of the land to Israel and 45% to Palestine, and they said that's not fair. We have a higher population, and so they rejected it. And instead they decided to go to war. And so what ended up taking place, instead of having 55%, Israel added more than 55%. Tough cookie. I mean, what do you expect? You lost the war. It is what it is. I mean, this is what happened. When you lose war, the winning side is not just going to be like, hey, I forgive you for everything you said. You're my brother. Of course they're going to take more. Of course they're going to oppress you. And you would have done the same to them. You said you were going to kill every single one of them. So, look, Palestine's not innocent in this. And it's not being pro-Israel, but I'm just saying, Israel's done a lot of bad things, and they do oppress the Palestinians today. But the Palestinians were also trying to do a lot of wicked and wrong things to the Israelis. And, quite honestly, they should have just accepted the original agreement of the partition 70 years ago. But instead, their land that's not really their own country, and that's their own doing because they've always rejected the partition. I mean, Trump tried to do a partition, recently, I don't know, during his first term in office, I think. They rejected it again. And of course, the partition is getting smaller because they're getting weaker and the other side's stronger. You don't have anything at the table to bargain with. It'd be like, for example, if you're a basketball player and you get offered a 5-year, $20 million contract, which I guess today that's pretty low, right? $4 million per year. 5-year, $200 million contract, and then you tear your Achilles during the year, and then you say, oh, wait, let's sign the agreement. It's like, no, we're not going to pay you $200 million. You just tore your Achilles. That's just how it is with Palestine. They've gotten weaker and weaker and weaker. And yes, the partitions and the agreements are getting worse and worse. And hindsight's always 20/20. Yeah, they should have accepted the original partition even though they didn't think it was fair. And I don't think the original partition was fair. I get that. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying Israel's innocent because they used their money and power. And yeah, it wasn't right for the Palestinians. I'm just saying in hindsight, it would have been much better if they had just accepted the original agreement. And they rejected it. And they've chosen many times to reject it. So the thing is, at this point, as we're saying, I want to support the Palestinian cause, what is the Palestinian cause? What do you want over the land? Because every time what they've always said is, we don't want to divide the land, we want all of it because it's ours. I don't know what to say to you. I mean, you're unwilling to bargain. It just is what it is. And so I don't see this as Palestine being innocent. And, quite honestly, a lot more of the Muslim countries were on the side of Palestine a long time ago and are no longer on Palestine's side. Because, you know what, you can only get money from other countries for so long. And basically at this point, and a lot of them have wondered, well, you had the chance at partitioning the land. I thought you wanted freedom. They gave you an area. Why'd you reject it? Why do you expect us to keep giving you money when you're rejecting it? And at this point, a lot of them are just kind of like, hey, you know what? We're not on board with Palestine anymore because, yeah, what was done to you was wrong, but you have been unwilling to compromise at all, so we're just not going to support you. Now, look, I encourage everybody to study out the history because I'm trying to get all of the main information and give you my opinion of it and trying to give you a balanced perspective. Yeah, the partitions of the land were not fair to Palestine. But the thing is, when you don't have much to bargain with, they're not going to give you a fair shake. It just is what it is. It's kind of like, if you go to your boss and you want a salary raise and he knows you can't get a job anywhere else, he's probably not going to give you much of a raise because he knows you don't have anything to bargain with. And the fact is, they went to war with Israel with a lot of Muslim countries on their side. They expected to win and remove all of the Jews. They lost. A lot of the Jews moved there legally. They lost in their battle versus Great Britain. Other Muslim countries are very good at fighting. Generally, Muslims are pretty good at killing people. I don't know why Palestine's not, okay? But it is what it is. And so at this point, that's what you're stuck with. And so are they being mistreated today? Absolutely. If you look at Israel and Palestine today, Israel mistreats Palestine. No question about that. And of course, I feel bad for someone who's born in that part of the world because it's not really fair to them, but it is what it is. A lot of people are born without freedom. A lot of people are born under oppression. It just is what it is. I mean, people are born in communist countries. They don't have much freedom. They have oppression. That's the way life is. And we have to realize in life, sometimes things don't go our way. Sometimes things are not going your way and it makes you, it doesn't seem fair. It's not right. It just is what it is, though. And you got to just deal with it. So here's the thing, all throughout the United States and through Europe, a lot of people with the technology today are learning about the wickedness of Israel and all the things they've done, and Zionism and the money and the Rothschilds and how they've done a lot of dishonest things to get money, and it makes people mad, and what they're doing is making a mistake by going to the other extreme and being like, and all throughout the US and Europe, you'll have like Palestinian rallies where you'll have lots of people, college students that know nothing about the history. They probably don't even know anything about the religion over there, quite honestly. They know very little about the situation, and they're really hardcore, like, free Palestine, without actually knowing anything about it. Because people take an extreme stance. Now, my stance is this. Both sides are bad. I don't want innocent people killed. I want to see people get saved. And look, obviously, as a Christian, we understand that since these things are going to take place over in Jerusalem, yeah, Israel's going to have a lot of power during the end times. It just is what it is. It's not a godly thing. It's just a fact. Money talks. They have a lot of money. All of that stuff. The Antichrist is going to make Israel quite a power and everything. It just is what it is. As a Christian, it's kind of like, what? I think both sides are wrong. Both sides have done a lot of bad things. What percentage would you give of blame? I'd give most to Great Britain. They kind of started the wheels in motion by saying, oh yeah, Palestine, we're going to give you your land. Oh yeah, Israel. And then all of a sudden you got a disaster on your hands, and it just is what it is ever since then. And look, here's the thing. This even though they're officially at war, the war over that part of the world is never going to end. Look, I've listened to a lot of interviews with Saddam Hussein with English subtitles, especially during his court trial. I've listened to Osama bin Laden and a lot of the Iranian leaders through the years, and listen to what they have to say. They will always bring up Zionism. They always bring up Palestine. They always bring up America. And what I'm saying is, don't get this stance, man, Israel's so bad that now Osama bin Laden's good, Saddam Hussein's good, and all these Muslim people are just innocent victims. And Muslims are not really chopping off people's heads. Muslims are not really torturing people. Palestine are these innocent victims. Yeah, they made a couple quotes. They're going to exterminate every single last Jew from that part of the world. But, it's just kind of talk. No, actually, they probably would have done that. And here's the thing. Do I want unsaved Jews to be murdered? No, I don't. I don't. The majority of people there are not reprobates. I get it. It's a wicked country, and I get that. There's a lot of wicked countries in this world. It doesn't mean I want the people killed that live in that part of the world just because the leaders are bad. Because if you actually listen to interviews from people from Israel, Palestine, and they ask them, what do you think about this other group of people? Most of them just say, I don't hate the people. And most of them don't even want to be involved in this conflict, but it is what it is because it's a holy war and people want that land. And a lot of things have happened in the last 100 years. And it's this never-ending battle. And it will not end until the end times. And it just is what it is. This doesn't make me, though, pro-Palestinian because I don't see them as innocent victims after studying their history. It's like, no, actually, you lost when you fought for your independence and you said a lot of things. And, it just is what it is. You've lost your land as a result of this. Judges chapter 15. And here's what I'm going to say. That when sin takes place, what often results is that no matter what choice you make, it's a bad choice as a result of sin. Because you might be saying, Pastor, how would you settle the dispute in Israel or Palestine? I mean, until Jesus Christ is ruling and reigning, I don't see a way to settle it. Because everyone says it's like, man, just partition the land. That's been offered to Palestine many times. They're not going to accept it unless they're given like a really nice amount. Well, okay, we'll give you 80% of the land. That's not going to happen. You don't have the power. There's no solution that's going to make them happy. Israel doesn't want to move. Palestine doesn't want to move. They're going to fight for it. And nobody's going to feel like it's fair. But here's what I want you to see in Judges chapter 15. Notice what it says in verse 1. But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. And he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber. But her father would not suffer him to go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hadst utterly hated her. Therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. And Samson said concerning them, Now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. Samson says, I'm going to do something wrong, but I'm more blameless. Basically, I'm justified for doing something wrong because of what they did for me, what they did to me. And this is what takes place in our lives, in marriage, isn't it? Husbands and wives get in a fight. The husband says something, so the wife says something more harsh, more harsh, more harsh, more. It just gets worse and worse. This is what takes place in fights. And guess what's taking place in Israel and Palestine and other parts of the world? Palestine feels like they're mistreated, so they attack Israel. And Israel's like, you did that to us? We're going to do this to you. And they're like, okay, you did this to us? Now we're going to do this to you. And both sides are like, yeah, I shouldn't have done it, but I'm more blameless. I'm justified in what I did. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. This is how all fights work. Where people feel like something happened to them, so I have the right to do this to you. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Verse 4. Look at the most recent war. Iran and U.S. It's kind of like, okay, you did something to us, so we're going to do this to you. Back and forth. And maybe it's done. I hope it's done. I don't want people to be killed. Especially innocent people. I don't know whether it is done, but maybe a ceasefire. I don't know. Is there any new news? Is the ceasefire lasting? They're at peace for a little while, or no one knows, right? It probably changes, before the end of the service. Verse 4. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail to tail and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burn up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. Then the Philistines said, Who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. So basically, Samson said, you did this to me, I'm going to burn all your fields. And the Philistines are like, okay, we're going to burn your wife and her family. You did this to us, we're going to do this to you. And Samson said unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after this I will cease. After that I will cease. We will have a ceasefire, okay? I will cease. There's going to be a ceasefire. I cease, you cease, ceasefire, okay? And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Edom. Then the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? And they answered, to bind Samson are we come up. Notice this, to do to him as he hath done to us. You did this to us, and now we're going to do this to you. This is the way fights work. This is the way that Israel-Palestine works. Because people are growing up that weren't around for the beginning of it, but they're like, but wait a minute, you took the last shot, so now it's our turn. And it goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And they've had many wars through the years. I think they've had 3 official wars or 4 official wars, but they're always fighting with one another. And here's the thing, you say, well, how does the fighting cease over there? Really, the only solution is one side has to be the better side and say, hey, we've been wronged, but you know what? I'm going to turn the other cheek. Now, is that going to happen? No, it's not. It's not going to happen. Neither side's going to turn the other cheek. Neither side's just going to be like, hey, you know, it's okay. No, both of them feel justified in what they did. Why? Because they did this to us, so we're going to do that to them. And here's what I'm saying. Yes, Palestine might be more blameless. Might be more blameless than Israel. That doesn't mean they're blameless. And so for me, and look, if it was like 95% to 5% one side versus the other, then yeah, maybe I could feel like, hey, I'm definitely on this side. They've really been wrong. I just don't feel that way from studying history. I mean, I kind of quickly went through stuff. I think I showed a lot of stuff with Palestine that shows that, hey, they're not so innocent. And my understanding of Palestine is almost all of them now are Muslim. If you were to go back to the time when this started, there was actually a lot more Christians in that area, and they fled. They either got persecuted or they fled. They got out of there. There was a much higher percentage of Christians at that time. They basically just got out. It's like, we're done with this or whatever. And it's primarily a fight. Yeah, there's some churches over there in Palestine, but it's few and far between. The vast majority of people there are Muslims. It's pretty much like now, it's actually about a 50-50 split because the Palestinians have more children per marriage than the Jews do. So as a result, the population is about 50-50 in that part of the world. Neither side, if I remember correctly, it's like 7.5 million to 7.5 million or something like that. Neither side's giving it up. And so, yeah, Palestine is left as a territory without a home. They're kind of like, I don't even, what do you really call them? It's kind of like, they're not really a nation, but they're kind of like, they rejected. They wanted a bigger area. And yeah, the offers they're going to get now, the offer Trump gave them most recently is pretty small. It wasn't very big because they just don't have any bargaining chips at this point. They're just not as powerful as Israel. They don't have the money. And here's the truth. And they can be mad about this, but here's the thing. Palestine has gotten a lot of money from Muslim countries. But Israel's gotten more from European countries. And it's made them more powerful. It's like, yeah, they've gotten more support from the outside than Palestine. Well, it's nobody else's fault, Palestine. It just is what it is. You got to deal with it. And so I feel bad for the people that grow up in that area, and I think they should just move on with their lives and say, hey, it doesn't matter what's done. I'm just going to try to be the best person I can be and serve God and do right and just forget about the past. Because if you allow bitterness to be inside your heart about things where you feel you've been wrong, it's only going to destroy you. And it has only destroyed Palestine as a people because they feel like they've been wrong and they're still mad about it, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And at some point I would just be like, man, you got to just move on. It's like, yeah, the deal you're being offered is lower than before, but guess what? The next deal you're probably going to be offered is probably going to be even lower. At some point, cut your losses. You lost a lot of money at the casino. Just accept it and move on, my friend. You gambled and you lost. You thought you can't really blame anyone else. You went to war, you gambled, you thought you'd get more, and you lost. It is what it is. Let's close the word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to be here today and just getting to see this information, both the history and the Bible on this topic with Israel and Palestine, God. And, help us as God's people to judge properly and judge rightly, and help us to realize that neither one of these sides is innocent. Both modern-day Judaism and Islam are both wicked religions. A lot of sins have been done on both sides. Both sides have a lot of blame to take, God. Help us just be able to reach both of these groups of people with the gospel, God. And I ask you to just help us reach the people in our area as well, God, and help us to serve you and do right. And if any of us have bitterness or feel very upset about things that happened to us in the past, God, help us just to put it aside and move on with our lives, because it will not benefit us at all. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.